No. That's in the paper.
I'm Derrick Pitts, Chief Astronomer at the Franklin Institute Science Museum, your cool astronomer, welcoming you to the April edition of Night Skies at Home. Night Skies at Home is the Franklin Institute's at-home version of Night Skies at the Observatory. Night Skies at the Observatory is a program that we've been doing at the Franklin Institute for quite a number of years, in which we invite our friends to come in and visit with us as we take a tour around the night sky using all of the resources we have available, our planetarium, our telescopes, our staff resources, everything. We've adapted this program so that we can provide it for you at home, hence the name Night Skies at Home. This happens to be the 43rd version of that. Here it is for April 2023. And we're going to have a really great program tonight. Our theme for our program tonight is Biggest Astronomy Myths. Biggest astronomy myths. I'm sure you've heard a few astronomy myths. Here's one just to give you an example of what that is. Astronomy myths might be something like, oh, I think I've heard that more children are born when there's a full moon. There's an astronomy myth. We're going to talk about astronomy myths tonight, and I have a whole list of them. And I hope you can think of some astronomy myths too, and we'll ask you to let us know what astronomy myths you've heard from. We'd love to find out where you're listening to this program. I want to know what the sky is like where you live. So please let us know where you're enjoying this program. After all, you have a night sky too. Your night sky is gorgeous, and we'd love to know where you're viewing the night sky. Our program is going to take us through all those things we need to know about the sky this month. Planets, constellations, space exploration, bits of information you might be interested in, all sorts of things like that. And of course, we welcome your questions. So if you have astronomy questions, please let us know. Just throw your questions into the chat for us, and we'll make sure we get them to you. We have our technical producer, Katie, who's taking care of things on the technical end. And then right here in the studio is our studio producer, Linda. Say hi, Linda.
Hi, everybody.
There she is over there. She'll be sending questions on to me. So please send us your questions. We'd love to hear your questions and find out where you're listening to this program from. We're very glad you can join us. So don't forget, think of an astronomy myth that you might have heard, and let's share that here. We're going to talk about some of those astronomy myths. So tonight, we're going to go through the sky phenomenon and talk about sunrise and sunset, moonrise and moonset, moon phases, and things like that. We'll also talk just a little bit about the coincidence of three major religious holidays that all have to do with lunar phasing, believe it or not. So we'll get to that too. So as I said, we'll talk about the fall constellations. That'll also help to connect us to the spring and winter constellations on both sides of the sky, as you can see it behind me. And then we'll talk a little bit about Artemis 2 as well. And then we'll get into those big astronomy myths. What are the biggest astronomy myths you've heard of? So we're going to do that. So let's just make sure you recognize, again, I'm Derrick Pitts, Chief Astronomer and Planetarium Programs Director at the Franklin Institute Science Museum, and welcome to the April 2023 edition of Night Skies at Home. We'll give you all the information you need to observe the night sky right from where you live. Doesn't matter where you are on the planet, we'll make sure you have the information you need to take a look at the night skies. Let's see who's listening to our program from where. Oh, we have friends tonight from Lansdale, Pennsylvania, I'm going to assume that is, Montgomery Township, from Bucks County, yay, Bucks County, Cape May, New Jersey, Atlantic County, New Jersey, South Philadelphia. Yeah, let's not forget, although we may be limited in an urban area, we can still see plenty of stuff in the evening sky. We have listeners tonight from the Lehigh Valley in Pennsylvania, from Cheltenham, Pennsylvania, and from Lawrenceville, New Jersey. Yay, Lawrenceville. So all of these places are really great places to observe the night sky because there are things that you can see from where you're observing. So please take advantage of the evening skies and go out and take a look at what's available for you to see. There's some really cool stuff coming up. We'll check in to see who's listening from where again later. I'm sure we'll have some other people joining us. So we look forward to hearing from you a little bit later. Okay, so let's get started with just what's happening in the evening sky right now. Let's just get on to the sky phenomenon as we know what they are. I'm sure you have recognized it now. Sunsets are coming a lot later. Sunset is around 7:30 p.m. right now. Sunrises are still at 6:34, and that's going to continue to get earlier and earlier as we move through the spring, headed towards summer. So we're actually adding minutes of daylight to the day on both ends of the day. Some in the morning when the sun rises a little bit earlier, some in the evening when the sun sets a little bit later. So right now we're adding about 2.5 minutes a day, 2.5 minutes of sunlight per day. Now, this is all tied to the fact that the Earth on its rotational axis as we orbit the sun is tilting the northern portion of the Earth more toward the sun. So we should get rid of the idea, and this is one of those astronomy myths, by the way, that the rotational axis of the Earth goes back and forth like this during the course of the year. No, that doesn't happen. What actually happens is the rotational axis of the Earth is set at 23.5 degrees from vertical. And as the Earth orbits the sun, that tilted axis has different orientations to the sun. So at some point, as you can see here, this axis as my finger is tilted toward the sun right here. So we have a larger arc of passage across the sky by the sun as it appears during the course of our day. And because of that, what that means is that we have a greater number of minutes and hours of daylight. So if we were to do the reverse really quickly, zoop, tilt the Earth back this way, well, guess what happens? If we do that, now that arc is much smaller. And it's smaller because the angle of the sun is much lower in the sky. And what that, of course, means is we have fewer hours of daylight and fewer minutes of daylight. So summertime is all about that top of the Earth, the northern portion of the Earth being tilted toward the sun, and that adds the minutes of daylight for us. And that's minutes of daylight for us. And that's where we're headed right now. Okay, so guess what? The moon is full today. Yeah, today is the full moon portion of the moon phasing for the month. And the moon rises tonight at 8:13. So in just about 20 minutes, the moon will be rising over on the eastern side of the sky. But it sets tomorrow morning at 7:18 a.m. 7:18 a.m. is when the moon sets tomorrow morning. The next new moon comes up on April the 20th of this month. That's the next new moon. Now, as it turns out, we have this really interesting confluence of holidays right now. So we have the Jewish holiday of Passover, we have the Islamic holiday of Ramadan, and we have the Christian holiday of Easter. Now, these three all happen to be coinciding right now at the same time, all in the same week. That's a little bit unusual. They typically don't all happen at the same time. But the reason why these holidays happen when they do is because they are all tied to the lunar cycle in different ways, in slightly different ways. And those slightly different ways that they're tied to the lunar cycle, that is, the moon's orbits around the Earth, because of that, right now we have this coincidence where all three are happening at the same time. So my major point here is that these three religious holidays are all connected to astronomical events. They're all connected to astronomical events. We try to create a false dichotomy often in our society by saying that science and religion don't mix. And in fact, the truth is that science and religion have almost always worked hand in hand in one way or another. So for any religion that tries to establish a calendar, there has to be a time constant somehow. And you want that time constant to be as accurate and reliable as possible. Well, the best way to do that is to make your time constant connected to the Earth's motion around the sun. And that's what all three have done. So, in doing that, it's now tied to the lunar phase, and that slight anomaly in the lunar phasing makes those dates fall separately in different times around the calendar. Right now, we have a coincidence when all three are there together in the same week. But again, the big story here is they're all connected to astronomy. So, just a little bit of information to hold you together around what's happening right now. So, how about some astronomy questions? Let's see if you have any astronomy questions. Let me check in with Linda and see what's up.
Well, Lena would like to know, does the full moon affect the brain?
Does the full moon affect the brain? Who was that again, Linda?
Lena.
Lena wants to know if the full moon affects the brain. Let me see. It's full moon right now. I'm trying to think if it's affecting my brain right now, Lena. I don't think it's affecting my brain. I think it's affecting my sinuses more than anything else.
That's a myth.
That is a myth, yes. That's a big myth that the effects of the moon, or that the moon, the gravitational pull of the moon, can affect the brain. And in fact, there have been quite a number of studies. I mean, real scientific studies over time, Lita. And these scientific studies show that there is very little correlation, if any at all, between the gravitational effects of the moon on the Earth and how we think, or our brains. And in fact, it really goes like this. Lunar gravity actually isn't really powerful enough to affect brain waves, right? The lunar gravitational pull is not powerful enough to affect brain waves. Yes, lunar gravitation, or the gravity of the moon, does affect tides on the planet, but that's in an open basin situation, like, for example, an ocean, as a good example. Not so much lakes, because that's a closed body, but in an open body, yeah, tides are for sure. The other thing is that tides only occur in open body areas. I should say it this way, in open bodies of water. So you can't really say that the gravity of the moon creates tides inside humans. No, that doesn't happen either, even though we are mostly water. Yeah, that's true, but the water is also bound up in cells. So we won't go sloshing back and forth as the moon pulls as it orbits the planets. Tides only occur in open bodies of water. And last but not least, probably what I think is the most powerful one of all, Lena, guess what? As it turns out, full moon is the same size as any other phase of the moon. So just because the moon is full doesn't mean it has stronger gravitational attraction at that time. It doesn't, because the gravity of the moon is based on the mass of the moon, and the mass of the moon doesn't change. The only thing that does change is proximity, its distance away from the Earth. That changes. So there can be slight variations in gravitational pull from the moon on Earth, but guess what? Not enough to make a difference in us. And in fact, since we're standing on the Earth, we are far more liable to the Earth's gravitational pull than we are to the gravitational pull of the moon. So if we put all those things together, Lena, it turns out that the idea that the moon affects us is one of those really big astronomy myths. Okay, we're going to take some more of these, but let's finish off our sky phenomenon. We'll talk a little bit about what astronomy events are happening this month in April, and then we'll come back and we'll talk about more of these big astronomy myths. If you have an astronomy myth, please let us know. If you have a big astronomy myth that you've heard of, yeah, we want to hear about that too, because we're going to talk a little bit about those and maybe a little bit about where they come from. Okay, so let's see. We talked about the moon being full. We're right here at this time of year. You can now watch the waning phases of the moon from tonight on. And that'll be fun to watch as we come up towards new moon on April the 20th. New moon on April the 20th. And gosh, that should be what? Just about 2 weeks from now. Let me see. Today is April the 6th. 2 weeks is 14 days. Okay. Right, that means it'll bring us right up to the 20th. Perfect. Works out just fine. Okay, so we're fully into the spring season now, as we've mentioned just a little bit already. We're headed on towards summer. Summer, of course, the first day of summer, the summer equinox. Where am I here? I'm so sorry. The summer solstice. There we go. The summer solstice comes up in mid-June, so that'll be the next particular orbital point of the Earth around the sun when we come to summer solstice. Summer solstice. Solstice, by the way, means that it's a word that means sun stand still. Sun stand still. We'll talk about that when we get there because there's a lot that goes into that concept of the sun standing still on that particular day. Okay, great. So let's talk about some astronomy events for this month. You know, there have been some interesting sky events already. One of the biggest events that happened just last week that you may have heard a whole lot about was the possibility of seeing a lineup of 5 planets across the sky just last week. You may have read about it in the news or heard about it on a newscast someplace. And folks everywhere, a lot of people were saying, you'll be able to go outside and watch this spectacular astronomy event. 5 planets in a line. Let me see if I can remember which ones they were. It was Mercury, Jupiter, Venus, Uranus, and Mars. They were all supposed to be in a line in the western sky just after sunset. And down close to the horizon, you were supposed to be able to see Mercury and Jupiter. Then higher up in the sky, bright Venus was to be visible. Still higher, just a little bit above Venus, would have been Uranus. And then much higher up in the sky would be slightly rosy Mars. Well, as it turns out, this was a perfect example of a phenomenon that I've seen more and more of these days. I've noticed that in the news, there are often reports of astronomical events, supposedly astronomical events that you can see, that aren't really visible. And I hate to say it this way, but I can tell when a news bureau has grabbed some information off of the web and then put it up for public consumption without any experience of actually viewing this. So when I read in the newspaper or saw online somewhere that Mercury and Jupiter were going to be visible just after sunset last week, I knew that whoever put that up had not really had any experience observing planets, and here's the reason why. Mercury has a very close orbit around the sun. It orbits only 33 million miles away from the sun. And of those planets, Mercury would have been the most difficult one to see because it was so low on the western horizon and so close to the sun, it would have been very, very challenging for anyone to see. It probably would have also been lost in the glare of the sun. So that would have been a very difficult one. Jupiter, not too far away from Mercury, was also in the glare of the sun. Now, if you were an experienced observer, you had a very clear view of the low western horizon with no trees, no buildings, no obstructions, clear sky, and you knew what to look for and had maybe seen it before, you might have been able to see Mercury. However, I'm sure many people saw Venus and I'm sure many people saw Mars. In fact, you can still see Mars and Venus now. However, Uranus would have been a challenge also. Why? Because Uranus is very dim. It's a dark greenish color, visible, how can I say? I want to say in a pair of binoculars, but only for the most experienced observers. In a telescope, even, it's a challenge to find because it's so tiny, it's very far away, and because it's so dim. It's a dim greenish bluish color. So that also makes it challenging to see. Those 3 planets at that time, Mercury, Jupiter, Uranus, would not have been visible to the unaided eye. You'd need a telescope for Uranus, and you'd have very little chance seeing the other ones down close to the horizon. However, here's a really good thing to keep in mind. As it turns out, at the end of each month this spring, that's April, May, and on into June, our moon, rising in the evening sky in its early phases, just after noon, before first quarter, slides right past Venus and Mars each month, right in the last days of the month. So right around the 23rd, 24th, 25th of each month, the moon will station itself right next to Venus first, and then right next to Mars just a day or two later. So now you can see this without any difficulty at all. And the other cool thing is that as we on planet Earth race around the sun, the position of those two planets seems to be changing such that the two planets, Mars and Venus, are moving closer together. And eventually they'll meet up and pass each other. That's what you should be watching for every month. At the end of each month, April, May, and June, watch how the moon slides past each of the planets, and you'll be able to easily define each step of the moon's orbit day by day. So give that a shot and see how that works out. Okay? Give that a shot and see how that works out. Don't worry about Mercury. Don't worry about Jupiter right now. Uranus, I have a really good picture of Uranus. I'll show you in just a minute. But get out and see those planets in the evening sky. Take someone out with you to observe on these nice, clear, warm nights we have coming up. Okay, great. So now we also have available in the sky great constellations to be seen. And what I'd like to do now is I'd like to take us out into the night sky and just do a very quick look at what constellations are available for us to see. Now, you know, the map that I really enjoy using for this that works so well on a computer or a home desk computer is the one that's known as Stellarium Web Online. Now, Stellarium is a home planetarium program that you can install on your home computer, and you can always have it there, or you can use the web-based version. And of course, you know, I like to use the web-based version for this program, so we're going to do that tonight. Our technical director, Katie, you're there, aren't you? There she is. You didn't take off to go get a piece of pie or something, I hope. Katie is going to do the screen sharing for us. She's going to take us over to Stellarium Web Online, and we're going to take a look around the night sky. Okay, so now I see that it's come up, and it's just going to clear up its resolution there, and there we are all set. So first off, folks, here's what I'm going to do. I'm just going to direct you around a little bit. You see the big black box there on the right, lower right. That big black box tells us our date and time, and you can adjust all that stuff in there. But we're really good for right now because we're seeing the sky as it appears at 8:23 p.m. So that's just about 15 minutes or so from now. And that's fine. And that also puts us perfectly in position for seeing planets and such too. So Katie, what I'm going to ask you to do, please, is if you'll take your cursor and just click the gray box at the lower right-hand corner. That way we can get rid of the big box. There we go. That sounds fine. And Katie, the other thing I'll ask you to do is if you'll grab the letter S and just pull it a little bit down toward the horizon for us, down to the bottom of the screen. That's right. And a little bit to the right, just a little to the right. That's fine. That's great right there. Hold it right there. Thank you very much. In fact, bring it back so we can get that letter W back up there. Okay, folks, now what this program, of course, does is it allows us to see, in fact, Katie, you can grab it anywhere on the screen and pull it around. That's fine. You don't have to be right on the letter. Yep, that's fine. That's good. Yeah, let's go right there. That's fine right there. Okay, cool. So now what you can see is look where it shows that Mercury is way over on the western horizon, up a bit higher. Okay, I'll take that. If you think you might be able to catch a view of Mercury, go for it. That's great. But you can also see where Venus is, and you can see where Mars is. Now, I'll give you a hint as to where Uranus is. If you see where Venus is right there, you'll see the letter V is the first letter of the word Venus. A little bit further to the left of that V is where Uranus is. Dim, very distant, and hard to see. But that's approximately where you'd look for it. All right? Okay, so now if we go just look way over to the left side of the screen, you'll see the moon just poking its head up above the horizon. There it is right there. Yep, perfect, great, thanks, Katie. And again, this is at 8:25 in the evening, so you can see the moon is just above the horizon. But now you can see that there are several bright stars out here in the sky ahead of us. And what I'm going to ask you to do, Katie, is if you would take the cursor, come down to that lower menu bar line there where you'll see the triangle first, just near the letter S, Yeah, if you'll just click on that first word right there, that first triangle on the left, just click on that for us, please. There we go. Now we can see the constellations that are available for us to see in the evening sky. Not bad, huh? Sure. Well, here's what we're going to do. Since the best way to observe the sky is to face south when you're outside looking for constellations, this way, this is how we're looking right now. So if you were outside right now facing south, you'd see the moon rising over on the left, and you'd see Mercury, hopefully, you'd see Mercury way over on the low western sky on the right. And you'd be perfectly positioned for items to pass overhead in the south as they rise in the east and then head over to the west. Great. Okay. Now, what we have available for us now are the outlines of the main constellations of the sky right now. So here's how we're going to do this. So let's go over to the moon side of the sky, and you'll see that the moon is just behind the stars of the constellation Virgo. If you begin to bring a line from the moon up through Virgo, you'll next come to the constellation Leo. You'll see Leo right there. There's Leo. Right. Now, Leo is the main constellation of the spring sky. And Leo, right now at only 8:20 in the evening, is not quite at the center location. If you go to the next constellation across, Cancer, and then the very next one across, Gemini, those two right there are occupying what I think of as the keystone spot in the sky, directly to the south, about halfway up. And at about 9:30 p.m., that's where Leo's going to be. Now, here's the cool thing about that. Once we get to that time of the evening, when Leo is right there, halfway up the sky, right in the center of the south, here's what happens. What happens is the constellation Orion the Hunter, the winter constellation that we can see just below Gemini there, has rotated around and will stand on the western horizon. And then the main constellation of the spring sky, Leo, will be right in the center, and we'll begin to see stars of the summer sky coming up in the east. So we're going to do a little trick here, Katie. We're going to advance the sky just a bit. And the way we're going to do that, Katie, is we're going to take your cursor. We're going to grab the sky right down there, right where it says Puppis, Puppis, directly south, right above the letter S. There we go. And we're just going to drag a little bit to the right there. Katie, click and drag. That's great. You're doing fine. Lovely. Okay, that's good right there. Thank you, thank you, thank you. That's fine. Okay, so now what we've done is we've rotated ourselves out. So now we're looking southwest, and you can see how Orion has swung around a little bit there. And this is getting us close to where we want to be, because here's the next thing I'm going to offer you. And that is, when you're out viewing Leo, if you look directly above Leo, you'll see a constellation called Ursa Major. Ursa Major, of course, is the Big Dipper. That's where we find the Big Dipper. The words Ursa Major, of course, are Latin for big bear. Ursa meaning bear, major meaning big. And right there, if you just look right above Leo the lion, you'll see Ursa Major. That's where the big bear is. So now you have a lot of the really coolest constellations of the sky to get you started. We've shown you where Orion is, the main constellation of the winter. We've shown you Gemini, the twins. Cancer is a difficult one to see because the stars are dim between Gemini and Leo. Only under clear, dark skies will you be able to see any of the stars of Cancer without any difficulty. But Leo is nice and bright, so it's easy to recognize. In fact, it looks like a backwards question mark, actually, with a right triangle off to the right. Off to the left. So you have the backwards question mark facing west. See that hook shape there at Leo? Well, that's the backwards question mark that marks the head of the lion. And then we'll find that we have the big bear up above. And then we go back through the constellations Boötes and Virgo to come to those constellations that are announcing the summer stars. Okay, so Katie, here's the next thing we're going to do. Just to add what we need here is we're going to add some artwork to this. So if you will, Katie, if you'll use your cursor to turn off the triangle and turn on the running man right next door. Ooh, there we go. Right. So now you can see where the lion is, where Leo was. You look right above Leo, you'll see where the big bear is. That's where the Dipper is. You'll see where Orion is over there on the far right-hand side. And just to cheat a little bit, Katie, if you'll hit that triangle once more. Now you have the artwork and the names, folks, to help you find all this stuff. This makes it a lot easier, doesn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, it really does. Sure. Even Linda agrees that it makes it so much easier. Okay, so I have just one little admonition for you. If you go outside to look at the sky and you see these pictures and these lines, you need to go back inside and lay down for a little bit because this shouldn't be there. This is only a guide that you're going to use. But if you use this online Stellarium program, you can pull these up and use these to help you get oriented for the sky where you live. You can adjust it for any location on the planet. You can adjust it for any time of day, any year you want. Your birth year, 1,000 years ago, last year, 20 years into the future, whatever you like. Okay, so that's our constellations for the sky. Katie, thank you very much for sharing the screen. You can turn all of these little things off and then stop sharing the screen, and that's just great. Okay, wonderful. So we've done that tour around the sky, folks, so you know what to look for when you're out there, both planets and constellations, okay? All right, super. Okay, a couple of other things that are happening, and then we'll get on to the biggest astronomy myths. Here's what's happening. As it turns out, Saturn is going to become visible low in the pre-dawn sky at the end of this month. So if you got a Jones for Saturn and you want to see some rings, well, it'll be 4:30 in the morning at the end of this month, but it'll be low on the horizon over on the eastern side. If you use a pair of binoculars, as it moves towards sunrise, you'll be able to see it as it rises up in the sky, okay? It's really backing its way into the evening sky, but it won't make the evening sky until September. So if you're an early riser, if you like to be up early in the morning when the sky is really clear and pristine for viewing, it'll be a great time to catch Saturn. So give that a try and see how that works out for you. Here's a couple of other things that are coming up that are really exciting in space exploration. There's a launch coming up. No earlier than, let me get that straight, no earlier than April 17th, the SpaceX Corporation will be doing an orbital test flight of their Starship Super Heavy spacecraft. Folks, this is something that you absolutely can't miss. Of course, you'll be able to follow it online. This is going to be an orbital test flight of one of the largest, most powerful rockets ever launched. This is the launch vehicle that SpaceX hopes to use to shuttle both equipment and astronauts, not just up to the moon, but possibly up to Mars as well, eventually in the not too distant future. So, no earlier than April 17th, this launch is going to take place. So keep your eyes on the news or go to SpaceX and follow it there. Well, if it turns out that you don't catch the 17th, go for April 18th, because on April 18th, there's going to be a Falcon Heavy launch at 7:30 in the evening. So that may be visible for some. And guess what? The very next day, on the 19th, there'll be another SpaceX Falcon 9 launch. It's a Starlink package that's going to take off. I'm so sorry. There's a Starlink package that's going to take off at 9:30 in the evening. And I think you might be able to see this one flying up the coast. The reason why I'm laughing, folks, is because our dog, Jetson, over here is over in the next room, scratching away at something. And we're trying to get him to be quiet because we think he can hear the scratching. But he's doing a good job. Yes, his name is Jetson. Yeah, that's right. You guessed it. Okay. All right. So those three launches are coming up on April 17th, April 18th, and April 19th. Starship Heavy on the 17th, no earlier than the 17th. And then there'll be a Falcon Heavy launch the next day at 7:30 p.m. And then on the 19th at 9:33 p.m., a Starlink package launch on a Falcon 9. So actually, the sequencing goes like this: the heaviest rocket ever, the Starship launch, then a Falcon Heavy, which is 3 boosters at one time, and then a Falcon 9, a single launch on the 19th. It's going to be spectacular, okay? So check that out. That'll be really cool. All right, let's stop and see if we have any questions.
We do. First off, we have a couple admirers of the Stellarium website.
Ah, admirers of Stellarium. Great. Marcia, great.
And Lisa.
Marcia and Lisa, aficionados of Stellarium. Thank you very much. I hope you like it. I think it works really great. It's very useful, very helpful. What else, son?
Well, someone wants to know, is it true that Saturn's rings are going to be tough to see in the coming years, and will we be looking at them from the edge?
Oh, that's a really great question. Is it true that Saturn's rings are going to be tough to see in the coming years? Yeah, this is a really cool phenomenon. You know, we're all used to seeing the rings of Saturn, but the orbital plane orientation of the planet itself and the Earth's orbital plane orientation sometimes position themselves in such a way that we see the rings edge on. Now, what does that mean it's going to look like? Well, it means that when you look at the planet in a telescope, what you'll see is the globe of the planet, but you'll see a dark line across the middle of the planet and not see any rings. That's because we're in such a position that we're observing the rings edge on, so we only see a line of the rings. Now, this positioning for the rings is called closed. When the rings are closed, that's what that's called. When we can see the rings really well because the orientation is such that the planet's rings are tipped toward us to see, that's called being open. So in a few years, what's going to happen is the rings are going to close up and we won't be able to see them. But this isn't a permanent thing. This is something that is cyclic and has been happening over and over again through time. And in fact, it's kind of an interesting way to keep track of long cycles. And when I say long cycles, we don't think about it, but in fact, you know, our planet orbits the sun once a year. I'm just thinking of something in my mind here. Jupiter orbits the sun once every 11 years. If I'm not mistaken, if I remember correctly, Saturn orbits once every 29 years. So what that means is that where we see the excuse me, where we see the planets in the night sky, constellations against in the background that we see them against, the changing position for Saturn is really slow. So if it's 30 years that it takes Saturn to orbit the solar system once, then that means in a human lifetime, Saturn only orbits the sun 3 times, as opposed to, say, watching Venus, which orbits so much faster, or the Earth that orbits once a year. You know, we get to swing around quite quickly. So when you start to think about observing in that way, then you have sort of a different time frame to think about observing. And there are certain kinds of things that can then only be seen just a few times in a lifetime. And that's why I think it becomes really important for us to recognize these cycles and take advantage of the opportunities to see what we might see of some of the more distant planets, because we only have a few times in a lifetime to see them. So rings open or closed is one of them. Yes, that's coming. It's not permanent. You could actually watch through the cycle. If you have a small telescope, you can watch the rings close up. Oop, we could do it this way. You can watch the rings close up and you can watch the rings open up again. So that'd be a fun astronomical thing to see. What's another question?
The pink moon. Everybody wants to know what's the story with the pink moon, and Mike is leading the charge.
Oh, Mike's leading the charge on asking the question about the pink moon. Well, wait a minute. So the pink moon, Mike, is actually a springtime moon. This is a colloquial name, a cultural name, if you will, for the full moon of a particular month. I think the pink moon is the full moon name for May. So if I'm not mistaken, that would be the colloquial name for the full moon of May. Now, Each of the full moons throughout the course of the year has a colloquial name. And those colloquial names come from a lot of different sources. We used to use it was common to use a set that was ascribed to the indigenous peoples of North America at one time. But occasionally those names have shifted back and forth as culture has changed. So you'll find that there are different lists of these. So, for example, there's the thunder moon, the grain moon, the hay moon, the frost moon, the beaver moon, the wolf moon, the long night moon. Each of these describes the full moon of a particular month and typically of a season, and it makes sense. So, for example, there's the grain moon. I'm sorry, not the grain moon, but the grass moon as well. So there are a number of these names, and that's what the pink moon refers to. We shouldn't think of it as being the color pink. That's not what it's going to be, but it's, as you can tell, that pink moon might be related to Easter, perhaps, in the springtime. So that's when that would be. Nice question, Mike. Thanks.
Yes, well, Janet also wants to know, why does the moon have so many different colors on certain days of the year?
Oh, why does the moon have so many different colors on certain days of the year? Well, it has to do with where the moon is in the sky, actually, Janet. If the moon is very, very high in the sky, you'll note that the moon almost always looks pure white or very close to white. But the closer the moon is to the horizon, the more distortion of the light reflected from the moon that comes through our atmosphere. So, with that additional distortion and filtering by particles in the Earth's atmosphere, we can get different colorations. Now, typically, that color tends to be in the family of the oranges, the tans, maybe even slightly brownish. I don't want to say brown, but more like orangey or tannish colors, right? Sometimes even reddish colors. You can get that as well. But that's typically a little bit more unusual and connected more with lunar eclipses than with just regular daily occurrences. So it's hard to get the other colors because of the wavelengths of light interacting with particles in the Earth's atmosphere of a particular size that allow only certain colors to pass through and get to us and look that way. So, for example, if you like to see an orange moon or a bronze moon, if you simply observe the moon as it's rising on the horizon, your chances are greater of catching that color when the moon is down close to the horizon than overhead. Okay? Thanks a lot, Janet. That's a great question. Okay, who else are we?
Mary Jean would like to know, is the sun stationary?
Mary Jean would like to know if the sun is stationary. Oh, that's a really cool and interesting question. Huh. Well, Mary Jean, here's how it goes. For us, the Earth and its family of planets and everything else that's part of the solar system, guess what? The sun is stationary for us. The sun is stationary. We orbit around the sun. But let's not forget the sun's life as a star. As a star, yes, the star, our star, I should say it this way. In its life as a star, our star is not stationary. It actually moves in the galaxy. And there are a number of motions, actually, Mary Jean. So we can think, first of all, of the sun's what's called its proper motion, in which we're talking about the motion of the star through the star field of the galaxy. So our sun has its own path through space. But we can also multiply on top of that a number of other motions, Mary Jean, one of which is the rotation of the galaxy. So this portion of the galaxy, or the whole galaxy, is rotating around galactic center. So our star is moving in a particular direction. This section of space carrying our star is moving around the galaxy. And we can add on to that because our galaxy itself is moving through space. So I think a colleague that I worked with, a predecessor, once gave a lecture in which he showed that the Earth actually has 12 motions all at one time that combines all of these different motions. But just to get back to your question about the sun, yes, the sun is not stationary. It moves, and of course, us and all the rest of the planets get dragged along with it. Really interesting question, Mary Jean. Thanks a lot. Okay, we have some additional listeners here in Philadelphia, Pottstown, Cheltenham, Orland, Chester Springs, and these are all in Pennsylvania, as well as Moscow, Pennsylvania. How about that? But you know what? The winner for the evening, folks, who is it? Juneau, Alaska. Yay! Howdy, listeners out there in Juneau. It's still bright daytime for you, but all this information will be useful to you tonight. So thanks for listening. We really appreciate you having us aboard with us. Juneau, Alaska. I got to get up there sometime. I understand the northern lights can be pretty nice up there, right? So, yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thanks for listening, folks in Juneau, Alaska. You get the Northern Limit Award for the evening. Yahoo! Fabulous. Thank you so much. Okay, so now that we've had a chance to talk about all those things and those questions, maybe we'll have some more later. But let's talk about these biggest astronomy myths. Yeah, let's get on to that. So we had the one question earlier about whether or not the moon's gravitation affects our brain, because that is a myth. It's a myth that the moon and its gravity affects us. And we sort of kind of thought that, or some people wanted to think that, because we know we're 98% water. Our bodies are 98% water. So you would naturally think that if the moon's gravitational force affects tides in the oceans, why wouldn't it affect the water in us? And we talked about that a little bit earlier. So that's one of the bigger myths. So let's find out what other myths there are. Here's one. Here's a myth. Did we talk about full moon births yet? Maybe just a little bit. Let's dig a little bit further into that. You know, there's this really great astronomy myth that more children are born when the moon is full than during any other phases. You've heard that, haven't you? Yeah, sure. We've all heard that. Well, guess what? Yep, that's a myth. Yeah, that's not true. In fact, a number of studies have shown, let me do it this way. Most studies show no correlation between moon phases and births. Now, you'll notice I said most studies, not all studies. Some studies indeed have shown a correlation between births and moon phases, particularly the full moon. But that's not the majority of studies. And there have been a lot of studies done over the years because this is a myth that has been perpetrated for a very long time. But if you actually study the number of births versus the phases that are occurring over time, the statistics show is that it's just as likely for a child to be born in a new moon phase or a first quarter moon or a last quarter as a full moon phase. So that full moon doesn't really make that much difference. And again, this goes back to what we mentioned earlier about none of the other phases of the moon are any less effective gravitationally than full moon. None of the other phases are less effective gravitationally than full moon is. And this is because the way in which we describe the phases of full, first quarter, half, last quarter, that actually refers to the amount of the surface of the moon that's reflecting light toward us. So at full moon, the full front half of the moon facing us is reflecting light from the sun. At first quarter, only half of that half of the moon facing the sun is reflecting light toward us. At new moon, the only side that's reflecting light is the side that's facing away from us, facing toward the sun. So we don't have any light coming to us from this side of the moon at all. So the moon hasn't changed size, hasn't changed mass. It's just as massive as it was before. So the gravitational pull is not very different. So nothing happening there. Okay. Now here's another one that I've found really interesting. And this connects to phenomena that are going to be happening later this year and next year. Okay. Folks, did you know that there is an annular solar eclipse happening later this year? October 14th, 2023. October 14th, 2023. There's going to be an annular solar eclipse happening right here in the United States. It takes place over on the western side of the country, and it actually is passing from the northwestern portion of the United States down through Texas and then out into the Gulf of Mexico. So that particular eclipse, as I mentioned, an annular eclipse, is a situation in which the moon is just slightly far enough away from the Earth, such that when the moon slides in between the sun and the Earth, the moon will not cover the entire disk of the sun. So it won't be a total solar eclipse. It'll be an annular eclipse. What's it going to look like? Well, it's going to look like a ring around the moon when the eclipse reaches maximum. You can travel out to see this, of course. If you head out to the western coast in October, you can go catch this eclipse. It'd be a really wonderful thing to do. I really think you might really, truly enjoy it. And then there's another solar eclipse that happens next spring, April 8th, 2024, a total solar eclipse of the sun. Visible across the United States again, coming up from the southwest through Mexico, through Texas, on up into the northeast and out into the North Atlantic Ocean. That's going to be a total solar eclipse. And totality, the line of totality, is going to go right across the northwest corner of Pennsylvania, right across Erie and across western New York. This is an easy one for everybody to get to. Why am I doing all this description? Because if you remember from the eclipse of 2017, many people put out warnings that said you should not be outside during a total solar eclipse. You shouldn't be outside. Well, I was trying to figure out why one shouldn't be outside during a total solar eclipse.
That's a myth.
That is a myth. In fact, when the moon is directly in line between Earth and the sun, the moon is blocking light from the sun. So, it should be okay to be outside. What I learned is that many people were fearful that if you were outside during a total solar eclipse, the radiation from the sun would be damaging to us. And I know what this is. I think of it as people interpreting, how do I say, over-interpreting protection against the bright light of the sun. And here's how it works. Let me just cover it this way. Whenever an eclipse happens, the moon passes in front of the sun, blocks light from the sun. At that point, you're standing in the shadow of the moon. You ready for this, folks? At that point, during totality, when you're standing right in the shadow of the moon, and please do not confuse this. If you're standing right in the shadow of the moon, at totality, you're blocking the light of the sun. So it's actually safe to look directly at the eclipse. Now, hear me out. Hear what I'm saying. If you're standing directly in the shadow of the moon at totality, only then. But here's the problem with that. The problem with that is if you do that, you're standing watching the eclipse and the moon is slowly moving past. You may forget how quickly time is passing. Now your pupils have dilated so that you can see the darkness around the sky at that time. And as the moon slides off the disk of the sun, a bright piece of sunlight comes through. Any small bit of the sun is just as bright as the rest of the sun. So you have to be extraordinarily careful about trying to observe the moon like this. Well, or observe the eclipse this way. Well, I think people have interpreted this as there are deadly eclipse rays that happen only during an eclipse. That's not true. There are no deadly eclipse rays. There's nothing more dangerous during an eclipse than at any other time. In fact, if you think about it, if you're standing out under the sun during an eclipse in the shadow of the moon, you're actually receiving less radiation from the sun than you would if it were a bright sunny day. So if there were going to be deadly eclipse rays, they would be happening during the day on a bright sunny day. And we know the atmosphere and our magnetic field protect us from that. So we're safe on that account. So there are no deadly eclipse rays. However, you should never look directly at the sun without proper eye protection. Did I say that you should never look directly at the sun without proper eye protection? I meant to say you should never look directly at the sun without proper eye protection. And that includes during an eclipse. You got me? Okay. Don't confuse it. We'll talk more about this as we get to the eclipses. So that's a big myth, the deadly eclipse rays. How about Planet X? There's one. Remember that one? Many people have talked about the possibility of another distant planet orbiting our sun farther out in the solar system in the realm of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, a gigantic planet looming out there that will cause problems for the rest of the planets in the solar system. Well, as it turns out, There aren't any others out there like that. That particular thought of Planet X is one that's been around for a long time, supposing that there could be another gravitational influence causing perturbations in distant planets of our solar system, of Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And as it turns out, folks, Planet X might be one of the great myths, but we've also now discovered that there are other objects orbiting our sun out beyond Pluto that are nearly the same size of Pluto, and we suspect that there may be a few that are slightly larger than Pluto. We have not done enough exploration of our solar system to have the complete answer to this, but we know that there are a number of objects out beyond Pluto. And so these objects might one day become classified as planets. So if I ever get into a deep conversation about planets in our solar system and someone asks me why Pluto has been demoted, so it's no longer a planet but a dwarf planet, well, part of the story is that Pluto is a captured body. It's not one of the original planets of our solar system. But at the same time, we've been able to identify other objects orbiting out beyond Pluto. And once scientists get a clear, definite definition, a clear, accurate definition of what a planet actually is, we may either end up with just 8 planets in our solar system, or maybe as many as 100 planets in our solar system. Oh, those extra ones might be a bit smaller, but we might consider them to be planets too. So we can go in one of two directions. So the myth of Planet X, gone. But there is a possibility that there could be a number of other objects, planets, orbiting our sun out beyond Pluto. We know that there are a few already. There could be a few more. Okay, let's do a couple more here. Supermoons. Many of you know my thing about supermoons. Oh my goodness. Whenever there is a full moon at perigee, when the moon is at its closest point to the Earth, we suddenly tout this as a supermoon, and anyone can go outside and see how big the moon is, how much bigger the moon is because it's so much closer. Well, in fact, folks, it's really challenging to see that difference in size. And here's the reason why. Even though the distance, that shift in difference is very, very tiny, the enhanced size of the moon is difficult to determine because you have nothing of size to compare it to. Now, if we could take full moons from several months during the course of a year and put them in the sky next to each other and measure the apparent size of the moon as the orbital distance slightly changes, then we would be able to see because we have something to compare to. But at the point when someone says, oh, tonight is a super moon, go outside and see how much bigger it is, it's really hard to do that. Now, I know some of you have actually seen the moon looking much larger in the night sky, and I know exactly when that was. It was when the moon was down close to the horizon. As it turns out, there is a very, very well-known optical illusion of when our brain tricks us into thinking that the moon looks really large when we see it near objects of known size. And so in those instances, when we see the moon rising on the eastern horizon in the evening, it looks big and orange, that's that optical illusion. Now, often people will say, oh, that's the supermoon effect. No, it's really just that optical illusion. And you can make that happen almost every month of the year. So if you watch the full moon as it rises, any month of the year, if you see the moon near an object of known size on the horizon, you'll get that magnified effect. So you can all sort of simulate the supermoon effect whenever you want to. Okay, we have one more, folks. One more we'll mention here, and that is astrology. Now, wait before you jump all over me about astrology. I don't want to say it's a myth. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is astrology actually was the science. I should do it this way. Astrology is a belief system that makes use of planetary positions and stellar positions to help us understand what might happen to us in our lives, or things that can help govern our actions and reactions from day to day. That's fine. It's a great belief system. That's okay. If that works for you, that's fine. I have no problem with that. But this was the astronomy before astronomy became a science. And you know what? Astrology actually has been extraordinarily useful because astrologers have been those people that have charted accurately the position and movements of planets in the sky for thousands of years. So before astronomy became a science, astrology was that. But once Galileo began to codify principles of physics, that's when the separation came between astrology, the belief system, and astronomy, the science. So, as a belief system, great, fabulous. I hope it works for you. As a science, astronomy looks at the physical relationships between objects in the universe. Totally different thing. Not saying it's a myth, but let's just separate the science from the belief system. And that's it. Okay, do we have any other ones, Linda? Any other suggestions for big astronomy myths?
Well, no, but you have inspired Mike. He says he's got his glasses and he will be heading to Erie. April 8th.
Mike is headed to Erie for April 8th with his observing glasses. That's great. Hey, look, let me just warn you, folks. If you think you might want to go see the total solar eclipse, go to the website Great American Eclipse. Great American Eclipse. You'll find all the maps you need, and those maps will show you where the path is, and you can begin making your plans. I'll tell you right now, Franklin Institute is going to be doing big events downtown to help accommodate all of those folks that can't go to a path to watch the eclipse. Come down, join us, and watch it with us instead. So that'll be October of this year and April of next year. And we'll make sure that you have all the equipment you need to see and understand what's happening with the eclipse. So check us out, folks. All right. All right. Thank you so very much. Oh,
We
wait.
got one final question from Liz.
Liz has a question. What's your question, Liz?
Is the big storm on Jupiter always in the same spot, or does it move along the planet?
Oh, Liz's question. Is the big storm in Jupiter always in the same spot, or does it move along the planet? Here's why that's interesting, Liz. The Great Red Spot, that's the formal name of the storm you're talking about on Jupiter, that storm has been there for as long as we've been observing Jupiter with a telescope, so a little over 400 years. That doesn't mean the storm has always been there, nor does it mean that that storm will always be there. In fact, over the last couple of decades, that storm has been shrinking in size. We don't know if it will eventually disappear. But if you look at high resolution movies put together from the high resolution imagery taken by the Voyager spacecraft as they flew by the planet, what you'll notice in the cloud tops are all sorts of other smaller spots that grow and shrink and come and go and sort of make their way along the clouds in the upper atmosphere of the planet. So the red spot itself seems to be fairly stable when you look at it in relation to all of the other spots that you'll see making their way through the atmospheric bands. So if you look up Jovian atmosphere turbulence, you might be able to get to some of these movies of the digital images that were taken of the activity in the Jovian cloud tops. It's amazing. It's really stunning that this stuff is going on. And you can also see the roiling that's happening in the Great Red Spot too. So it sort of stays in the same spot, but other spots move. Thanks a lot, Liz. Greatly appreciate it. Okay, everybody. We've come to the end of our program for this month. Thank you very much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. We hope that you've picked up some information that will help connect you to the night sky. Remember, it's your universe. You should go outside and enjoy it wherever you can observe the sky. So don't forget, you've got the planets in the western sky that you can see, Mars and Venus, and the moon sliding past the two planets toward the end of this month, next month as well. You also have Saturn rising in the pre-dawn sky later this month, low in the east at around 4:30 a.m. Watch the moon as it makes its way through its phases. It's at full right now, so in the next few nights, it's going to be rising later and later in the evening. That means you'll be able to catch it in the morning over in the west before it sets. So give that a shot too. And of course, those great constellations that are there to be viewed. Leo in the center of the sky at 9:30 gives you the winter constellations over on the western side of the sky just setting, the summer constellations coming up on the eastern side of the sky. Don't forget, no earlier than the 17th of April, the SpaceX Starship Super Heavy launch, followed by a Falcon Heavy the very next night, the 18th, followed by a Falcon 9 on the 19th. All of these are cool things for you to see. You can follow them all online, and we hope you get out and take a look at the night sky. Don't forget, you can use this web application that I've been using, Stellarium Online, of course. Stellarium-web.org will get you to that. And don't forget, if you want to find out when satellites are available to be seen, go to NASA's website and look up Spot the Station. Spot the Station at nasa.gov. And you'll be able to find out when International Space Station is visible where you live. Oh, by the way, if you haven't checked out the Artemis 2 crew that's going to be heading to the moon next year, go check out their picture at nasa.gov too. 4 astronauts are heading up to do a circumnavigation. That's not happening until next year, but you can watch all their training and watch how the mission develops between now and then. Okay, again, thanks for joining us. If you're looking for more in-depth information about the universe, about the wonders of the universe, check out my video cast, A Practical Guide to the Cosmos, at beyond.fi.edu. Be sure to step outside, look up, and explore the night sky. Like I said just a minute ago, it's your universe. Get out and enjoy it. Thanks a lot for joining us, folks. We'll see you next month. So long. Derrick Pitts, Chief Astronomer, Planetarium Programs at the Franklin Institute. You can follow me on Twitter still, at Cool Astronomer. So long, folks.